Hi there, it's Sewa, and welcome to another conversation with a business founder who's created their own unique blueprint for success. In today's conversation, we're talking to Kimberly Wilson, who's the founder and CEO of HUED. HUED is a platform that matches Black and Latinx people with culturally competent doctors. Kimberly founded this platform after she had a bad experience with a few doctors in the New York area. She saw 4 doctors who happened to be white males, and they were either dismissive of her diagnosis and pain or recommended that she have a hysterectomy as a 30-year-old. So she ended up having to go over 200 miles away to find a doctor who just got her. How many of you have ever had to deal with something similar? Late last summer, she was able to partner with Vaseline to build out her platform to include dermatologists. So she's now also partnering people with culturally competent dermatologists. So if you're interested in finding out how Kimberly was able to grow her tech platform as a lawyer and get funding and build a team around it and get developers to help her build the platform, keep on listening. Kimberly Wilson, welcome to She's Off Script. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So for any of our listeners who haven't heard of you, could you share who you are and what you do?
So my name is Kimberly Wilson, and I'm the founder and CEO of HUED. And HUED is a healthcare engagement solution tailored to address the needs of Black and Latinx populations.
So I know you've had a varied career, both in higher education and in journalism. So could you share what your career path has been like, at least before launching HUED?
Absolutely. So I have spent over a decade working at the intersection of social justice, education, and media, as you mentioned. So my career has been spent in leadership roles at the Grio, the Root.com, working at Black Enterprise, and more recently at Essence Magazine. But then my higher education career, so I served as an adjunct professor. I worked at NYU. I taught at Howard University. And my courses were centered around social media and digital strategy, public relations, and then strategic communication. So I have a background in communications just, by way of my undergraduate degree. I later went on to pursue a law degree. And while my path didn't take me, down that background, I've still been able to use it in the work that I've been able to do.
Why law?
At the time, I thought that I wanted to be, a big shot entertainment lawyer. I had worked, in entertainment for a number of years. I had interned when I was in college in entertainment, and I wanted my path to kind of take me that way. I really enjoyed learning about the law. I loved law school. I graduated from Howard University School of Law, but that wasn't my true passion. And honestly, I really loved learning about intellectual property and internet law and just everything that was taking place on the internet during that time. Because when I was in law school, there was no precedent for anything that was happening on the internet. Everything was so new, which that love of digital, that love of, IP really helped shape my career, because I went then using my marketing communications background and then this newfound love of the internet, I actually went into digital strategy. And I went to an agency and I did social media and digital strategy. And that kind of shaped my career path and my career direction, later going into digital strategy, content strategy, and editorial.
And I can definitely see that in the way you've been able to get the word out about HUED. And I would love to dive into that. But given that you didn't come from a tech or a medical background, what were your initial steps with getting HUED up and running? And I think before that, I've heard this, but our listeners may not have heard the backstory to why you launched HUED to begin with. So maybe let's start there.
Absolutely. So no healthcare background whatsoever, no tech background, as you mentioned. So just starting there, everything was a challenge. As we know, two industries, specifically from a leadership standpoint, where we often, don't see women of color kind of at the helm, as we know, eh, the statistics specifically within tech are jarring when it comes to the amount of funding that Black women receive and just the amount of, tech founders who are venture backed just in general. When
Mm.
we know that, Black women are the highest rates of entrepreneurs, unfortunately, as it pertains to tech, we're just not getting funded. But my path kind of took me in a really interesting way because I started HUED based off of a personal experience. I was diagnosed with uterine fibroids in 2017, and they are common for many women. So it's funny because I had never even heard about uterine fibroids until I was diagnosed. And then everybody told me, oh, well, everybody has it. And it is extremely common. But for Black women specifically, up to 90% will develop them by the time they turn 50. So
Mm.
we all have them or get them in some capacity, and many will never experience any issues. But if you're like me, I had over 30 of them, and they began to impact my other organs and in my day-to-day life. And I lived in New York City at the time, and over a period of 6 months, and I've told this story quite often, I visited 4 different white male providers in New York City, and they either dismissed my pain altogether. And there were some days I couldn't get out of bed. My abdominal pain was that severe that I
Mm.
would, wake up crying and, curled up on my bed, and I would have to go to the emergency room because of my pain. And then the others stated that, the only way to absolve myself of any pain or issues that I was going through was to have a hysterectomy. And I
In
was,
your 30s.
yeah,
What?
I was exactly 30 at the time. So, finding out that personal news was very traumatic for me at that stage of where I was in life. And how, Black women or communities of color, just in general, is how we find providers, healthcare providers, is through our own direct network. So, we might text a group of friends, or we might post something on Facebook, or maybe a family member is referring physicians to us, and that's how we are able to recognize our care team. And the closest recommendation that I was able to receive was in Baltimore, Maryland. So I lived in New York, and the only Black OBGYN I was able to find within my own reach was over 200 miles away from home. And the experience was a complete 180. She was a Black woman who, in addition to the bedside manner just being completely different, and her just sitting and seeking to understand what I was going through, she told me that there were other options for me.
Mm.
I think in terms of just the medical system in general, a hysterectomy was what they used to tell our parents' generation years and years ago. But there's so much new technology now that she said, there you have this, and this is another option, and this is another option. So, a year later, I had an abdominal myomectomy with the same physician. So, I traveled, packed my bags, and I had this. I had a very invasive surgery, but ultimately my uterus is still intact. And it wasn't until finding that physician that I really received the culturally competent care that I needed and deserved. And it was following this experience that I talked to people. I had conversations with friends and family members and colleagues. I posted about the experience on social media, and it was just a resounding, feedback that so many people go through the same thing every day, in terms of the relationship and the experiences that they have with healthcare providers.
Hmm.
And for me, it was recognizing that this is a larger issue, and we need to do something about this issue, because it's no coincidence that we African, and when I say we, I refer to the African American demographic, or just even the Latinx community. We have the highest rates of maternal mortality, heart disease, diabetes, colorectal cancer, asthma,
Mm.
and so on and so forth. And that is not just economic challenges that we are being faced with. A lot of that has to do with the psychological barriers that exist for communities of color, which has stemmed from the history of the healthcare system. So, we have fear, we have distrust. especially in, when we think about distrust relative to vaccinations that are about to come on the market. And, I've been seeing personally on social media, people talking about not wanting to be the first or not wanting to
Mm-hmm.
participate in that. So, we have to, wanting to really get to the root and understanding of behavioral things that were happening within the healthcare system. And by no means is HUED the end all be all solution, because there's a lot of work that has to happen. But we
Absolutely.
wanted to serve as a bridge to starting those conversations and really closing the gap in medical care. And that was a very long-winded way of, walking through my personal experience. So.
No, and I think it's important that everyone understands that as a backdrop to the journey that you've then gone on. But
Mhm.
it's one thing to see a problem, and it's something entirely different to be able to address the problem. So, back to the question of once you knew that this was a problem that you wanted to tackle, given
Mhm.
that this is not something you had any background or skill in, how did you approach it?
So, and I know you're really trying to get to the nitty gritty of like what that process looked like. So, and I could dive deeper into that. So, a lot of it was research, understanding competitors and what the space looked like, and what I was actually trying to solve. There's so many pieces to healthcare, and understanding, okay, what was the actual solution that I wanted to accomplish, and starting from there, recognizing industry competitors, and then kind of writing out, okay, this is how we're different. This is our value proposition. This is what we're going to accomplish. I then tapped into resources and just industry mentors, who had been, technology adjacent or had worked in some capacity, and started asking questions. And honestly, I really put myself out there at a really early stage. I started going to tech conferences. You know, I had launched the company in October of 2018, and that next month I registered. I went to Afrotech in San Francisco. I networked, I met people on the UX side, I met designers, and I really dived into the content of technology and what it meant to start a company. And then thankfully, I have a legal background, so I got to work on, the legal formation of how I was going to structure the company, what bylaws looked like. First things first is purchasing the domains of everything that I wanted the name to look like. There were different names in the earlier stages than HUED, and then, really ideating on what that looked like, and purchasing basically every domain that is even similar to HUED in name.
Mm-hmm.
And then, hiring a software developer, and what that process kind of looked like. And we built something. We built an MVP. It was a really early stage kind of model of what we wanted to build out. And then literally just having conversations. So what we did is we surveyed people, because how do you understand what a solution is without really understanding the problem more, and understanding, okay, I see this as a benefit, but what do people see as a benefit? So we started surveying people on the patient side, on the physician side, about their pain points and what they would want to see in a technology platform that really hit on all of their pain points. So that's how, I did it in the beginning. And I read books. I read a lot of books. You know, and thankfully I have a marketing background. So that is one of the key drivers in our success, is that we started to build community online. We started to build a buzz around it. We started to collect, email addresses from people, so that, at least follow up with a newsletter and have them participate in our beta, so that once the MVP went live, we were able to start to collect data. And it wasn't until this year, where, that first year was such a struggle. I'm not even gonna lie. Understanding the business model, understanding our value proposition, understanding, there is a huge difference between a service-based company and building technology,
Mm-hmm.
and the intellectual property that goes into that. And, you want to file a trademark, and you want to just do all these things. So that was what the first year looked like. And it was a a lot of no's. So
So
I
let
would,
me pause you there because you have said so much in a very short span of time, and I know people are going to be wondering. You
okay.
mentioned that you try to get as much into the tech community as possible.
Mhm.
When you said, and then I hired a software developer, you said it as though it was so seamless. Was it?
It was not. I actually went through a number of software developers until, building out the team that we have right now. I had the so I had no clue where to even find a software developer.
Mm-hmm.
I had one in my network, and I reached out to her to say, hey, could you build this for me? She didn't have the time or the capacity. What she said to me is, there are meetup groups. That exist where basically there's We Build Black, which is one organization, and they do programming where you can, I lived in New York at the time, so I do want to, have that caveat that every city has different kind of structures on
Mm.
networking groups. But there are networking groups that exist where software developers, and We Build Black is one of them, host monthly meetups, and founders will attend the meetup and pitch to software engineers at the event. So
Wow.
you'll go to the event, each founder will present an idea for 5 minutes and just talk about what they're trying to build. And then afterwards, software developers will come up to you and say, hey, I have an interest in that. And then there's some level of mutual understanding there. I also, the same way that there are in-person meetup groups, there are job boards. So I would search software developers New York City, and there would be meetup groups and things like that online. So everybody who I wasn't able to meet at events, I literally posted building a healthcare technology company that matches patients to Black providers.
Mm.
And people responded to my listing. And then I would meet with people in person, and talk to them. And then I found my first developer. It didn't end up working out. Uh, it costs a lot of money.
I
And we were
bet.
building an MVP, and I had used all of my personal savings. I didn't have any funding. I used personal savings. I had about, in the early stages, about $10,000 dedicated to building this platform. $10,000 in the grand scheme of things is not a lot of money to build technology. So because I wasn't able to offer it, a lot of money to a software developer, obviously that whittles down the list of people who are interested. I found my first developer. It didn't work out. Then I found a second developer, who his name is actually Devin. He is the founder of We Build Black, that organization that I'm talking about. So he built the first MVP. How I've got into my development team now is, I've been in the industry a little bit more. I've, built up my network, and actually it came through a recommendation of a friend who is a founder, and our technical advisor was actually a technical advisor for her company, and he's been leading our software development right now.
Mm. The other thing I love you said is you started to build and launch before you launched your MVP, in that you built a community. Could you speak to the importance of that for the growth you've been able to accomplish since?
Absolutely. So before we even had any technology built, we started, I started having conversations and telling people about what you build. And some people do it differently. I will say some people work in stealth mode, and they build everything behind the scenes and then they just launch. Um, I thought it was more important to, have stakeholders, have people interested and exciting, and develop a waiting list of people who could participate in the beta, because we wanted to build our network, we wanted to build our listserv, we wanted to build our email newsletter, and do it a little bit differently at first. So in that, I would go to community events and functions. And again, um, this is pre-COVID. So
Yeah.
um, really, really doing event. So for example, I hosted an event in partnership with Trellis Health, which unfortunately is a women's fertility clinic that closed earlier this year. But last year, we worked with them to offer free fertility testing for Black women in New York City. And then we did programming around Black women and fertility and women's health. You, really to educate these
Mm.
communities about what was existing. So we were trying to go into local communities to, one, educate, inform, provide health literacy, and offer them free services towards their health, and then say, hey, this is what we're building, be a part of the HUED community. So we offered something and then provided value in some type of way. So that's what we were doing. We were going to conferences, we were hosting events, and we really built up a network of people who were then ready, because they had already had a part of the HUED experience, to then say, hey, this is what we're building. You should be the first, the first part of our trial, or the first people to benefit from this. And that's really how we built up community in the early onset.
And I like that approach because there's a little bit less friction when you're trying to get people to buy in, because they've already built that relationship with you, as opposed to springing it on them and having them be like, I don't know who you are. I'm not sure if I really vibe with you as a company.
Right.
So when you're building a social enterprise like HUED, you probably need to strike a balance between serving the community, like you said, and then also generating enough revenue to keep doing that work. So given
Right.
that you bootstrap the company, how have you approached that balance?
So I will say the first year we didn't generate any money, and really, founders, you're not going to make money for a while. So I want anybody who's starting a company to really not think about profit. You're not seeing profitability until years into the company. But that first year was us really understanding our market. It was understanding the pain points of our potential customers. And it was really honing in and identifying the solution that we wanted to be able to provide to these communities.
Mm.
Then what happened is 2020, it was such a huge shift in everything. COVID-19 happened, the onset of Black Lives Matter protests, following the death of George Floyd. A lot of things started to happen with the backdrop of our company and of our country, which ultimately ended up serving our company in a beneficial way. I will say this does not happen to a lot of people. It's just that we're working in the healthcare sector, and then a global pandemic happened, and the populations that were disproportionately impacted by it happened to be marginalized communities in our exact demographic.
Mm.
And where we had conversations a year ago where we would talk to potential investors and stakeholders, nobody cared about what we were doing. But then the conversations this year completely shifted because of data and statistics and what we were seeing on the news every day.
You became
So
relevant.
it became relevant. So then it became, everybody was interested in what we were building. So it just happened so fast. And I will say we're in a unique position that this typically doesn't happen with a lot of companies and with a lot of founders. But it put us in a position where we then started having to turn down everybody, because we are doing what's best for our company, and
Mm-hmm.
not people who are just looking for a moment in time, right? So it's
That's
put
such a
us
politically correct way to say it. Because I know a lot of companies and maybe influencers have experienced that as well, where all of a sudden there's so much attention from people who may not have given them the time of day before now. But then
Absolutely.
again, that is part of the secret sauce of success, is um, timing, as well as all the preparedness and the work that you've put into that, getting to that moment where things just seem to jump off.
Absolutely. So that is really what happened. So we announced a partnership last month with Unilever. We had been working with Unilever since the beginning of the year. They, at the early onset, saw the value in what we were building. And we wanted our partnerships to feel like that, organic, that we were mission aligned, and it wasn't just to be a quick conversation, so that companies are able to stay relevant right now. Because again, whenever I talk to investors, whenever I talk to anybody, our biggest concern and the who we are focused on is the needs of patients.
Mm-hmm.
We, and I hate to say it, but our biggest focus is not on payers or insurance providers or hospital systems or physicians. We are ultimately trying to serve the needs of patients, and people that look like you and myself, because our communities really need an advocate, right?
Mm-hmm.
In my case, I was able to be myself, my own self advocate. I knew to keep searching until I found the right person for me.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is not in that position. And sometimes we make choices based off of what is put in front of us, because that is what we are entrusting our lives, to healthcare providers.
Mm-hmm.
But, they don't always get it right. And when we think about the history of our healthcare system, we know that to be a fact.
Yep.
So, it really kind of put our company in a stronghold for 2020 and beyond because of, what we're doing.
So, in learning about HUED, one of the phrases I keep seeing placed in quotation marks is culturally competent. And it seems to me like one of the initial hurdles to getting partners would be for them to acknowledge that disparity in healthcare exists. So, have you gotten any pushback in using that term, culturally competent?
So, and I do want to point that out, because ethnicity is not equal or does not always translate to culturally competent. Where we started with the platform is matching providers of color to patients of color, because data and studies show just 1-to-1 patients who are matched, Black patients who are matched with Black physicians instantly report improved patient care experiences and ultimately improved health outcomes. But it is very unrealistic as a company when we think about, on the supply side, that every patient will always be matched to physicians of color. So
Mm-hmm.
our larger strategy, because also, Black and Latinx physicians only account for 13% of the physician demographic.
Mm-hmm.
We're focused on the 87%, right? The 87% is who more so have to deal with the population who we're going after. So what we've been doing is we're focused on cultural competency curriculums, cultural sensitivity trainings, and really understanding the racial divide and the racial disparities, and what is existing between those patient care experiences that equals or equates to not receiving the same quality of healthcare to white counterparts. Our second-rate healthcare system is shortening our lives, and working with the 87% so that we can move the industry forward. So that is our larger term strategy, and I'm glad you kind of asked that, because cultural competency in general is such a buzzword this year,
Yes.
that I'm sure we're all very tired of hearing it. But all cultural competency means is really understanding, and seeking to understand the needs of that patient and giving them the care that they deserve, they need, and they deserve, for what, and without dismissing their fears or their traumas. And it's really all about understanding. So how can we move the industry forward so that they understand and they seek to understand the needs of their patients?
Got it. And so, given that you're now hitting your stride as a company, I'm sure you're pulled in a lot of different directions. What does an average day look like for you? And what kind of support system have you put in place in order to make sure you stay sane as a founder?
That's a great question, because anybody who speaks to me or anybody who's on our team knows that on average, I'm in about 60 meetings a week. Um, they are very intensive days that I have a minimum about 10 meetings a day. I'm meeting with other healthcare organizations. I'm meeting with different partners that we have. I'm pitching. We are going through an institutional round. So we are raising venture capital dollars. So I'm
Nice.
having conversations with investors. I'm having conversations with stakeholders. Um, so yes, that's what my kind of day to day looks like. Nobody ever told me ahead of being a founder that I would, you spend so much time. It is a full-time job in itself to raise venture dollars, right? So, now we're at a place where we're generating revenue, and I don't have to do everything myself. So we have a team, in terms of our team members. We have a growth strategist, we have a researcher on our team, who focuses on UX and just kind of clinical research. We have a social media manager. Obviously, we have our development team. So we have people in place now, so that In the beginning, it was really me doing everything myself. And now we're building traction. As you mentioned, we are generating revenue and we're able to pay team members to support what we are building.
How does a company like HUED generate revenue?
I'm glad you asked that question. So we generate revenue through partners. So, obviously Unilever is a customer slash partner of ours. But in addition, we work with payers. So insurance providers, we've just started the conversation with different employers and health systems to help them develop their solutions to this problem. So we have a few different pathways for revenue, but those are just a few of them.
Great. So what is next for HUED and how can we support your growth?
So yeah, obviously, our biggest thing is building out the technology and so that it is more customer centric and patient centric,
Mhm.
um, providing more health literacy, more resources, our cultural competency certification and curriculum that we've been building. So these are a few of the things that are kind of within our radar. But in terms of supporting and engaging, absolutely visiting HUED. Our website is huedco.com. If you are searching for a provider, please register. If you are a provider and you are looking to be a part of our HUED network, obviously we vet physicians who want to join, and you can register and submit your profile on the site as well. So on the patient and physician side, please visit HUED. You'll get all the information and resources that you need. And we just want to continue to engage with everybody.
Great. Kimberly, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. I'm excited to see what the future has in store for HUED.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
All right, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Kimberly today. If you're watching here on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of the future conversations. If you're listening to the audio version of this on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you're listening, go ahead and subscribe so the new episodes hit your feed there. And then also leave us a review and share the episodes. All right, with that, we'll see you for the next conversation here on the She's Off Script podcast.